Welcome to Cosmic Comics. The Saga of the Serpent Crown picks up once more in the back pages of the spectacular Spider-Man Annual number 9. Most of this story is an original work with the exception of perhaps the introduction of Naga at the end of the tale. The deviant empire of Lemuria and the great human city of Atlantis both sank during the Great Cataclysm, covered in episode 4 of this series. Both continents had now been inhabited by Homo Mermanus, split into two groups, the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. Originally, both groups of Homo Mermanus worshipped Neptune, which I've always found odd considering that he's a creation of the surface-dwelling humans. On this day, Awesome, the patriarch of the Atlanteans, approaches Neptune to warn him that a new cult has arisen worshipping a god named Seth. No pun intended, but this moment marks a sea change in Seth's approach of world domination. Seth's power on the surface has been greatly diminished due to the arrival of the new Egyptian god Seth, who stole Seth's remaining followers by posing as Seth. Going back further, following Seth's defeat by Demigorge, Seth can no longer transition back into the Earth 616 universe without the aid of sentient followers. There was a period during early Atlantean history where they were regularly set upon by a series of natural disasters and barbarian attacks. Emerging from the other end of these trying times was a faction of young Atlanteans who believed it was time to avenge their fallen brothers. Awesome was ashamed that his own son, Bilal, was the leader of the Atlanteans who were eager to return to war. His son had given up on Neptune and renounced his father's god in favor of Seth's promise to have every last barbarian put to death. Awesome tries to warn his son about the dangers of following a god who demands blood, but his pleas fall on deaf ears. Awesome has gone to Neptune because he's afraid that a good chunk of their population is already secretly worshipping Seth, and he beseeches Neptune that all he needs to divert disaster, to turn the people back towards Neptune's embrace, is any small sign extended to show that he cares about the Atlantean people. Instead of mercy, Awesome is faced with an angry god who demands that the Atlanteans are the ones who owe him, and he says that he's going to refuse to extend a hand to those who are already weak of faith. Neptune doesn't help the situation by threatening that if the Atlanteans do turn away from him, then they can expect him to dump his wrath upon them. Neptune finishes his audience by telling Awesome to go away. I'm not certain if it's ignorance, fear, or pride that govern Neptune's actions here. One would think that he would be aware of the elder gods, but then again, perhaps not. Either way, Neptune initially fails to recognize Seth for the powerful threat that he is, as once Seth physically enters this world, he'll easily outclass Neptune. Completely bummed after getting drug over the coals by his god, Awesome returns home where he is promptly called a blasphemer and arrested by the guards who are wearing armor engraved with the image of a seven-headed serpent. The guards drag Awesome outside of the city and in front of a giant seven-headed altar made entirely of gold. Half the population of Atlantis was present and chanting Seth, 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 and Awesome knew that within the sphere of the altar was Seth himself. Leading the proceeding was Awesome's son Bilal, who greets him with a ridiculously complicated, nonsensical phrase that I'm going to read out loud because it just needs to be read aloud. Welcome, Father, to the death of the old, older, and the birth of the new, to the rebirth of the mighty Seth upon this world, through the death of his greatest enemy. I mean, it's just so ridiculous. I mean, for starters, who's he referring to when he refers to Seth's greatest enemy? That should be Gaia by all accounts? Possibly Demigorge? But in this sense, he seems to be referring to Awesome. But that doesn't make sense because, I mean, Awesome's the king / patriarch or whatever of Atlantis, but that doesn't really put him into a position to be Seth's greatest enemy. Bilal tells his father that his cult secretly built the Golden Serpent to act as a repository that would magnify their individual psychic energy into a collective that would allow them to bring Seth back into the Earth 616 universe. And with that, Bilal raises his dagger in order to kill his father. To those who have followed the entire series up to this point, this move should come as no surprise, as each time Seth is drawn forth, it seems he requires the sacrifice of a blood relative. Before the dagger can find its purchase, Neptune burst onto the scene, destroying the altar with his trident. The force of the blow strikes so hard that Seth himself is heard to cry out in pain as a portion of his life force is torn away from him. All of those gathered together there save Awesome are the victims of tragic deaths at Neptune's hands. Neptune is one angry god. And let's not gloss over the fact that this strike on Seth was nothing more than a cold, sissified sucker punch. Neptune built a sphere around the portion of Seth's life force that broke free and set a huge sea monster to guard it. The Atlanteans would forever avoid the place and called it the altar of Neptune's wrath. Awesome turned to wandering the seas and gathering his people together. Decades later, he would live to see the Atlanteans rebuilding Atlantis once more. In the next panel, we find Awesome on his deathbed. This scene reminds me of Moses leading his people to the Promised Land, but never being allowed to enter. This is once again reflected in the sense that he spent some time out in the wilderness gathering his people together, similar to the way that Moses led his people through the desert for 40 years. Awesome will never re-enter Atlantis, but even as he lay dying, he uses his final breaths to say a prayer to Neptune, asking for mercy and guidance for his people. In return for a life of service to Neptune and dedication to the Atlantean people, Neptune appears and agrees to take care of the Atlanteans for a time in order that Awesome may peacefully transition into the next world. This ushered in a golden age for the Atlantean people as they lived side by side with their god, who took this time to bestow kindness upon his people. All the while Seth watches, nursing the wound of Neptune's sucker punch from within his nether dimension. Here he plots his revenge, reaching out to the serpent crown once more. Time passes. For what is 100 years to one such as Seth, who ruled the earth for millions of years and has lived billions? Around 600 years ago, a frightened Lemurian slave is searching through a portion of the ocean floor that his people usually avoided. While looking, he runs across two corpses, each still clutching at the serpent crown. These are the corpses of Atra, the greatest human alchemist of his time, and Frog, king of the deviants. These two sank with the Lemurian continent while fighting over the crown at the time of the cataclysm. This means that even in death, neither has given up the crown for somewhere between 19 to 20,000 years now. The slave picks up the crown, but even then the hands refuse to relinquish, both hands breaking away at the wrist and still holding on to the crown. Before he can do anything with the crown, his heart stops, and he perishes. Two of the Lemurians are scared and ready to leave, but another, the one that Seth has obviously chosen, knows the truth. No unworthy man may lay his hands upon the serpent crown. He then walks over and picks up the crown. The hands that were clutching the crown fall away as a form of acknowledgement that the crown's true master has arrived. Naga, Emperor of Lemuria, had been marked by Seth and given reptilian features. As Naga places the crown upon his head, he proclaims his godlike status. I'll trace Naga's history with the serpent crown in the next episode. Thanks for watching. Feel free to hit any of the buttons below. I'm out.